And we are back for prepping for winter with the second Tyrion sample chapter. Tyrion is in the middle of the Battle of Fire, so nervous about his position that he's going half mad and nearly strangles Penny and his insanity. Jorah and Tyrion are working on getting the Second Sons to defect, while the Second Sons have refused to carry out their orders, from today's commander and yesterday's commander, and now while meeting in their command tent, the Second Sons have received a new messenger with new orders. And so let's continue.
The Unsullied are advancing towards the Harpy's daughter, the messenger announced. Bloodbeard and 2 Giscari legions stand against them. Whilst they hold the line, you are to sweep around behind the eunuchs and take them in the rear, sparing none. This is the command of the most noble and puissant Mogar Zojerzin, Supreme Commander of the Yunkish. Morgar? Casporio frowned. No, Gorjak commands today.
So here the messenger, who I think is the Perfumed Hero, lets us know the state of the battlefield before giving the Second Sons their new orders. Now, the Perfumed Hero's story of what's going on adds a tad more confusion to what exactly is happening in Barristan's neck of the woods. So, according to Daenerys 6, A Dance with Dragons, there are in total 6 legions from New Gis. 4 marched up the road from Astapor and 2 went by ship. And according to Daenerys 8, 2 legions are beyond the Skahazadan and 2 are east of the city in the Kazai Pass. That means that the final 2 are the ones west of the city, joined by the Yunkish slave armies facing Barristan. Now, according to Barristan in his first sample chapter, these 2 legions from New Gis were parked between the trebuchets Harpy's daughter and Harridan, and it was Barristan's plan to take down Harridan. However, according to fan reports of a reading of the second Barristan sample chapter, a legion of 6,000 strong is there defending Harridan. 6,000 is way larger than any slave army. Quentin identifies the largest as 2,000 in the Windblown chapter, so this seems to be a legion from New Gis. And so there seems to be some confusion. Were the legions between the trebuchets, or was one at the trebuchet? And who was wrong? Barristan? The chapter report? George R.R. Martin? It's tough to say. Anyway, the last we hear from Barristan, he cancels his attack on Harridan and turns to strike some weaker slave armies instead. But now we hear about legions from New Gis, both of them being at Harpy's daughter, which is extremely odd. If both are at Harpy's daughter, which legion was at Harridan? And why are the Unsullied going for Harpy's daughter when the plan was to go for Harridan and then they switched their plan to attack slave armies? Were the legions actually between the trebuchets and this is Barristan and company turning north towards Harpy's daughter? If so, then what army deterred him from attacking Harridan? Or maybe Barristan is confused on which trebuchet is which? Whatever the case, it's a big mess. Either our author is wrong or our characters are wrong. Or perhaps there's another idea. It could be that the Perfumed Hero doesn't really care about the specifics of the battle and is just saying whatever. The Second Sons were rejecting bad orders, and now the Perfumed Hero is giving ones that sound reasonable. Charge at the Unsullied from behind. What exactly is going on up there isn't that important. The Yunkish just want to direct forces into the battle. Now we also find out that these orders are from a new commander, Morgar Zojerzin, aka the Drunken Conqueror. And of course, Casporio immediately outs himself and notes that Gorjak, aka Pudding Face, is today's commander, which once again highlights how ridiculous it was that he went to see the girl general with Brown Ben, and the fact that they were all debating her orders. The Second Son certainly knew who the proper commander was, Gorjak.
Gorjak Zoeraz lies slain, cut down by Pentashi treachery. The turncloak who names himself the Prince of Tatters shall die screaming for this infamy, the noble Morgar swears. Brown Ben scratched at his beard. The Windblown have gone over, have they? He said in a tone of mild interest. So here we find that the Windblown have supposedly killed Pudding Face and the Drunken Conqueror has taken over. However, I will say there is something off about this. In the Spurned Suitor chapter, we are specifically told who precedes the Drunken Conqueror in the Yunkish command succession. It's Gazdor Zoalak, aka Lord Wobblecheeks. It's not Pudding Face. Now one could argue that perhaps Lord Wobblecheeks has somehow died, though we have no reason to assume he has. Barristan is currently fighting Little Pigeon and not Lord Wobblecheeks. But even assuming that Lord Wobblecheeks has been killed by, say, the Windblown or the Ironborn, it's still too early for the Drunken Conqueror to be leading again. The Drunken Conqueror had just led with the Yunkish less than a week ago.
Keep in mind, timeline-wise, the Drunken Conqueror led the same day as the Spurned Suitor chapter. A couple days later, Quentyn attempts to steal the dragon in the Dragon Tamer chapter, and then the body lays dying 3 days in the Queen's Hand chapter. And then the next day, the battle starts. There's supposedly dozens of Yunkish lords, and we specifically know the names of a dozen. So unless a whole bunch of people have died, or the Yunkish have weird succession, it's not the Drunken Conqueror's turn. He has apparently jumped the line to seize command. Whatever the case, the betrayal of Pudding Face by the Windblown is an interesting turn of events. Back in the Queen's Hand chapter, Barristan sent Arch and Drink over to offer Pentos to the Tattered Prince, requesting that he switch sides. And in Barristan's first sample chapter, Barristan thinks his success depends on the Tattered Prince's greed. Only there was something odd going on with Arch and Drink when this request was made by Barristan. The 2 Dornishmen were acting funny, and Arch seemed to be planning something. There are various ideas on why Arch and Drink were acting off, and one is that the Tattered Prince is actually dead, and someone like Drink would put on his cloak to impersonate him. Who knows if this has actually happened, but it is curious that the Perfumed Hero has called the Tattered Prince the Prince of Tatters. Tatters is Arch's nickname for the Tattered Prince, and as far as we know, Arch's alone. Perhaps the Perfumed Hero's use of tatters is a coincidence, or perhaps our author is trying to remind us of Arch and Drink, but this is striking. The Perfumed Hero has no other linguistic mess-ups, but he errs here, and I do wonder if Arch has somehow sent out a message using the wrong name, which is being repeated here by the Perfumed Hero. Anyway, Brown Ben shows some mild interest in the fact that the Windblown have chosen to defect. The Windblown are 2,000 men, which is 4 times that of the Second Sons, and they are fairly close by. Tyrion saw them ride past Harridan earlier in the chapter, so this is a rather significant event for the Second Sons. If the Mother's men really did defeat the Long Lances, this would place the Second Sons between enemies, even with the Unsullied heading north rather than south as the Girl General supposedly feared. But of course, Brown Ben has already decided to defect at this point, so now it seems that it's the Yunkish lords who are completely surrounded on the western front. But again, we should never forget what lies to the east and north. More Giscari foes. 4 legions, Carthene cavalry, elephants.
Tyrion chortled. And we've traded Pudding Face for the Drunken Conqueror. It's a wonder he was able to crawl out of the flagon long enough to give a halfway sensible command.
And so here Tyrion laughs and equates Pudding Face with the Drunken Conqueror. And if you remember last time, Cosporio claimed that all the Yunkish lords were the same. Everyone is stereotyping and dismissing the Giscari, when we the reader know that the Giscari are actually quite different. The Second Sons seem to believe that all of the Yunkish lords are idiots, but we have every reason to believe otherwise, and our characters are due some comeuppance for their prejudice. In fact, specifically, we should actually think the Drunken Conqueror is an intelligent one. First off, Tyrion admits that the command is sensible, unlike what they thought of the Girl General and Pudding Face's orders. The order is to strike the Unsullied from the rear, which actually utilizes what the Second Sons are. Heavy horse, meant for charging into infantry, and this move would trap the Unsullied between a large force, the Giscari, and a mobile one, the Second Sons. It's a hammer and anvil strategy, which is exactly what Barristan is doing. But we can also suspect that the Drunken Conqueror is intelligent, as he was in command when the Yunkish executed Groleo while freeing Hizdar's kin. This clever move created mistrust and division in the Mirri's court, leading to Barristan's coup. Now, it's of course ironic that Tyrion of all people is criticizing the Drunken Conqueror for his alcoholism and it getting in the way of his strategy. Tyrion even opens this chapter saying that only a fool rides into battle sober. If we flip this notion around, the Drunken Conqueror is a genius. And of course, it's probable that Tyrion actually has no particular feeling about the Drunken Conqueror. He is only belittling him because he wants the Second Sons to defect, something that Brown Ben has actually already made a decision about.
The Yunkishman glared at the dwarf. "Hold your tongue, you verminous little—" His retort withered. "This insolent dwarf is an escaped slave," he declared, shocked. "He is the property of the noble Yezin Zokagaz of hallowed memory." "You are mistaken. He's my brother in arms, a free man, and a second son. Yezin's slaves wear golden collars." Brown Ben smiled his most amiable smile. "Golden collars with little bells. Do you hear bells? I hear no bells."
And so here the Perfumed Hero finally recognizes Tyrion and wants him returned and punished. We should note that the Perfumed Hero uses vocabulary like verminous and insolent, so I again find it unusual that he messes up and says the Prince of Tatters instead of the Tattered Prince. Anyway, this confrontation was expected as Brown Ben glanced at Tyrion before he let the perfumed hero into the tent, and here he smiles an amiable smile, a comfortable reaction to the perfumed hero's shock. Now, Brown Ben does mention that if Tyrion were a slave, he should be wearing a gold collar with bells, and then asks rhetorically if they hear bells. Now, Brown Ben is just referring to the collar, but there might be some foreshadowing here. Dothraki also wear bells in their hair to signify their victories, and a Dothraki Khalasar may eventually join the battle. Back in Daenerys 5, A Dance with Dragons, Brown Ben mentions that the Yunkish went to treat with the Dothraki, and there is a chance that Daenerys might get a hold of a Khalasar as well. Or this could possibly reference Romo and his Dothraki riding into battle with Barristan. They should be on the hunt for the prisoners, Daario, Hero, and Jogo, as they are honor-bound to rescue Jogo. Considering that Tyrion and Jorah also want to rescue the prisoners, it may be that the paths of the Second Sons and Romo's Dothraki will cross, and so the Second Sons may actually hear bells.
Collars can be removed. I demand that the dwarf be surrendered for punishment at once. That seems harsh. Jorah, what do you think? This. Mormont's longsword was in his hand. As the rider turned, Ser Jorah thrust it through his throat. The point came out the back of the Yunkishman's neck, red and wet. Blood bubbled through his lips and down his chin. The man took 2 wobbly steps and fell across the Sivas board, scattering the wooden armies everywhere. He twitched a few more times, grasping the blade of Mormont's sword with one hand as the other clawed feebly at the overturned table. Only then did the Yunkishman seem to realize he was dead. He lay face down on the carpet in a welter of red blood and oily black roses. Ser Jorah wrenched his sword free of the dead man's neck. Blood ran down its fullers. So here the perfumed hero demands that Tyrion be handed over to him, and then he's murdered by Jorah. Now, I do find it perplexing that, in the midst of battle, a Yunkish lord would be concerned with the punishment of a random freed slave. Yes, it may be that the perfumed hero just has horrible priorities, or it may be that the subservience of slaves is of the utmost importance in Yunkish culture, especially during a battle that involves slave soldiers. However, I do wonder about a third option. When Tyrion was on the auction block, there was a bidding war over him where characters like Zaharina and Brown Ben Plum tried to get a hold of Tyrion. Of course, Brown Ben is the head of a sellsword company and Zaharina deals with fighting slaves, so we have to assume that the two did not value Tyrion as an entertainment slave as Yezzan did, but instead knew who Tyrion was and his potential value as a hostage to the Westerosi, namely Cersei. And so it may be that the perfumed hero is trying to take a hold of Tyrion for the same reason. But of course, we'll never know as the perfumed hero is killed. Now regarding this, it is of note that Brown Ben and Jorah work in concert when murdering the perfumed hero. This once again shows that the two spoke before the meeting in the tent, as Inkpots had recommended to Jorah. Jorah is not a sergeant and had no place in the tent, but here he is nonetheless, participating in conversation and killing the perfumed hero with only a subtle signal. And with this, it seems all but certain that the plan to defect and kill the Yunkish messenger was in place before the meeting was held. After all, it would be incredibly bold for Jorah to unsheath his sword and kill the perfumed hero without explicit consent. And I do think it's likely that Jorah unsheathed his sword earlier, likely the moment the perfumed hero entered the tent. So the passage includes some violent imagery, and we are left with black roses in a pool of blood. Now, I'm not sure of the symbolism here, if there is any. That said, black and red are the Targaryen colors, and Lyanna did have black roses in her bed of blood at the Tower of Joy. Additionally, with Jorah entering the tent and changing everything, we are called back to a Game of Thrones with Mirri Duur in her tent. There she slit the throat of a sacrifice, a horse, and it then lay in a pool of blood. This throat wound to the perfume hero may be a parallel to that horse. And there does seem to be some symbolism with the fact that the Sivas board has been knocked over. Sivas is a stand-in for the battle at hand and the Game of Thrones in general. In the first Tyrion sample chapter, we found Tyrion trying to convince Brown Ben that he was in a weak position in Sivas when he was actually in a strong position. And that reality was reflected on the battlefield. And now it's happening again. Jorah's actions have knocked over the board, changing everything and erasing Tyrion's losing position, both in game and in life. The white Sivas dragon ended up at Tyrion's feet. He scooped it off the carpet and wiped it on his sleeve, but some of the Yunkish blood had collected in the fine grooves of the carving, so the pale wood seemed veined with red. All hail our beloved Queen Daenerys! Be she alive or be she dead? He tossed the bloody dragon in the air, caught it, grinned.
And so next we get Tyrion picking up a white Cyvasse piece veined with blood. And with this, we get some more symbolism. Now, a white dragon may symbolize Viserion, but we should note that his colors are actually more precisely cream and gold. With the veins of blood red on white pale wood, the imagery much more closely resembles that of weirwood, which means we have an image of a sacrificed man's blood feeding a weirwood. This seems to be a callback to Bran's final chapter in A Dance with Dragons, where he observed red veins that looked like blood in his acorn paste, and later experienced the slitting of a man's throat that fed the weirwood. Tyrion even seems to be rejuvenated by the sacrifice. And with all this imagery of sacrifice, we get more of a feeling that the dead man in a pool of blood is in fact a callback to Mirri Maz Duur's sacrificed horse. Now, it is somewhat interesting that Tyrion's inner monologue places doubt into whether Dany is alive or dead. His and Jorah's discussions earlier with Brown Ben certainly pushed the idea that Dany was alive and will positively return. Here we find out definitively that with Tyrion, this was all a bluff. As we found out in the first Tyrion sample chapter, Tyrion believes that he is useless and a dead man unless Brown Ben considers him valuable.
"We've always been the Queen's men," announced Brown Ben Plum. "Rejoining the Yunkish was just a plot."
And what a clever ploy it was. Tyrion gave the dead man a shove with his boot. "If the breastplate fits, I want it." And finally, we have Brown Ben announcing that the Second Sons are defecting back to Daenerys with the lie that their previous defection was a ruse. Here Tyrion compliments Brown Ben on what a clever ploy it was, seeming to take credit for it himself. And while it was Tyrion's idea to defect, from what we can gather, it seems to have been Jorah's idea to claim that the original defection was a ruse, with Jorah vouching for him. Whatever the case, the final line is meant to be a bit of humor, but actually displays Tyrion's new feelings about his position in the Second Sons. Tyrion, while feeling impotent, is given the Second Sons' leavings for armor, the old rusted and dented pieces that might have not even stopped a weapon. He is last in the order of importance for the company, but now he is claiming a lord's armor of the highest quality, showing he believes himself to be important again. That said, Tyrion may be overstating his importance, as again, it's Jorah that will be vouching for Brown Ben with Dany and not Tyrion. Tyrion believes he's valuable as a man who destroyed Tywin Lannister, but Dany only knows Tywin as one of Robert's dogs. We shall see if Tyrion is actually that important. And so this brings us to the end of the Tyrion sample chapter. Now, much of what's happening with the Battle of Fire we already discussed at the end of our Barristan sample chapter discussion. Things for the moment seem to be going well for Barristan as he's taking down the Wise Masters. Not to mention the Ironborn have arrived, the Windblow and the Second Sons have defected, and supposedly the Mother's men have defeated the Long Lances. But Barristan has some things not going for him. His command structure and communication will likely become confused. Some of his men hate him, and he can't see out of his helmet. And there are still the other Giscari legions, the Camel Corps, and the Elephants out there. With that bridge of ships, the Giscari may be able to come in from the north. Not to mention the trebuchets, the dragons, the problems back in the city with the brazen beasts, and who knows if the Dothraki or the Lazarene will come. Tyrion may have gotten the Second Sons to switch to the losing side. On top of this, Tyrion has his own things to worry about. Kem, his brother-in-arms, may actually hate him. Penny may not be as innocent as she claims. And Tyrion and Jorah may have to face Romo and the Dothraki when trying to retrieve the hostages of Daario, Hero, and Jogo. It's likely Tyrion will survive, but we are unsure how exactly. Captured by the Ironborn? Fleeing with Romo? Meeting Arch and Drink? Saved by a dragon? It's all hard to say. And with the end of the Tyrion sample chapter, we move on to our next and final sample chapter. Next time we will head to Braavos for Arya's shenanigans with Mercy. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.